Imagine staring at a living, breathing tree, a masterpiece of horticulture that you have been meticulously pruning, wiring, and shaping for, well, 40 years.
40 years of your life poured into a single
All
organism.
right, 4 decades. And you realize it is still not finished.
Never really is it?
No, exactly. But now imagine that the only way to truly complete this decades-long project, to give it the frame it absolutely demands, is to lock it inside a piece of mud that has been blasted in a kiln at over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
It sounds almost counterintuitive when you put it like that.
It really does. But welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at that exact highly volatile intersection of organic growth and ceramic permanence.
And the tension there is really what makes this entire field so compelling for you to explore. I mean, you have the incredibly slow, unpredictable cellular growth of a tree,
Yeah.
juxtaposed with the sudden, violent, immutable permanence of fired clay.
So today we are looking at the 50-year legacy of Dan Barton.
Yes, he is widely recognized as a pioneer of British bonsai. But to genuinely understand his influence, you really have to look at him as a disruptive visual artist.
Not just a gardener, then.
No, not at all. He took the intensely traditional, highly formalized Asian aesthetics of bonsai ceramics and completely fractured them. He used a distinctly Western painterly approach to raw clay.
Which is fascinating, especially when you look at his origin story. It doesn't sound like the typical path for a master of British bonsai.
Right, he wasn't born into a long lineage of Japanese potters or anything.
Exactly. Dan Barton was born in Hong Kong in 1938, the youngest of 13 children.
Wow, 13.
Yeah. And he grew up in these bustling, chaotic local markets where he first saw bonsai trees. He was captivated by them as a child.
But he didn't actually start working with them then, did he?
No, he assumed the craft was this impenetrable ancient secret, completely out of his reach. He actually didn't attempt to cultivate his own bonsai until 1969.
After he'd already moved to the United Kingdom?
Right. And even then, he was only pushed into it by a student friend. He had zero formal horticultural training.
Which means he was entirely self-taught in the botany, the pruning, the wiring, all of it.
Yeah, just figuring it out as he went.
But he brought a formidable, highly refined set of skills from an entirely different discipline. I mean, he was trained as an art teacher.
Right. He eventually became a senior lecturer.
Yes, and the head of the photographic department at Bristol Polytechnic, which is now the University of the West of England.
So his professional life was anchored deeply in graphic design and applied photography.
Exactly. And when you study photography and graphic design at that level, your brain is just, well, it's rewired to process visual hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely. You spend your life looking through a viewfinder, hyper-aware of negative space.
Right. Defining focal points, analyzing how light rakes across a texture.
And framing the shot to aggressively exclude anything that distracts from the subject.
And composing a bonsai is effectively the exact same process.
Yeah.
It's just painfully slow.
Yeah, because you prune away branches to carve out negative space.
Yeah.
You expose the trunk to create a focal point. And you position the foliage pads to catch the sunlight.
The principles of composition are universal, but the physics of the medium are entirely at odds.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. Photography is inherently flat. It is a two-dimensional representation of a fraction of a millisecond.
Just a frozen moment in time.
Right. But bonsai is a four-dimensional sculpture. It exists in three physical dimensions, and it moves through the fourth dimension of time.
Because it's alive.
Exactly. It's constantly growing, shedding leaves, thickening its bark. So Dan had to translate a visual language built for instant static capture into a medium that never actually stops moving.
And his photographer's eye, which was obsessed with composition, immediately noticed a glaring deficiency in how bonsai were being presented in the UK back then.
Right, during the early 1970s.
Yeah. If the tree is the subject of the photograph, the pot is the frame.
That makes perfect sense.
And for a head of photography, presenting a 50-year-old masterpiece of nature in a terrible mass-produced frame is just completely unacceptable.
Oh, it would ruin the whole composition. But because of the era, he couldn't just order a high-quality Japanese pot.
No, the supply chain simply didn't exist in the UK at that time.
So what did he do?
He was actually forced to plant his early, meticulously styled bonsai in old jam jar lids.
You're joking.
No, jam jar lids, plastic yogurt pots, discarded ovenware, whatever he could find.
The visual dissonance of a beautiful miniature pine sitting in a plastic yogurt container must have been agonizing for a graphic designer.
Agonizing is the perfect word. And that sheer aesthetic frustration is what drove him down into the basement studios of the adult art department.
At the Royal West of England Academy.
Spot on. But he didn't go there to become a traditional potter.
No, he went there specifically to engineer the frames his trees demanded. He realized he had to build the canvases himself.
And that necessity formed the bedrock of a philosophy he has operated under for half a century.
The perfect marriage.
Exactly. The belief that the pairing of a bonsai and its pot must be a perfect marriage.
Which sounds lovely, but in the context of ancient bonsai tradition, demanding a perfect marriage where the pot is an equal partner is actually incredibly rebellious.
Wait, really? Why is that rebellious?
Because it shatters the conventional hierarchy. In traditional Japanese bonsai aesthetics, the philosophy is one of absolute subservience.
Okay, so the tree is the undisputed sovereign.
Precisely. The pot is merely a necessary vessel to hold the soil. It's not supposed to be the star of the show.
Right.
Consequently, traditional Japanese training pots are frequently entirely plain. They are highly formalized, geometrically strict, and visually muted.
They are designed specifically not to be noticed.
Exactly. But Dan rejected that entirely.
He argued that if the bonsai is a living work of art, placing it in a sterile industrial box is a disservice.
Yes, he viewed the raw, unfired clay as a secondary canvas. He deliberately employed expressive, Western artistic techniques to challenge that Asian conformity.
Wait, if bonsai is this ancient, revered Asian tradition rooted in strict, minimalist aesthetics, isn't slathering Western expressionism all over a pot essentially horticultural vandalism?
That's a great question.
Doesn't a loud artistic pot just steal the spotlight from the tree it is supposed to be supporting?
That is the tightrope he walks, and it is a risk he is acutely aware of. But think about it. Nature itself is rarely symmetrical or sterile.
True. Nature is quite chaotic.
Right. So a geometrically perfect, highly polished pot under a weather-beaten gnarled juniper often looks artificial.
Ah, I see. Like a wild animal trapped in a clinical page.
That's a brilliant analogy. Dan balances the risk of overshadowing the tree through his physical interaction with the clay. He doesn't manufacture these pots.
He describes the process as feeling the pot into shape, doesn't he?
He does. By relying entirely on his hands rather than rigid industrial molds, the pot retains a rugged, earthy harmony.
So it might be an independent artwork, but it is born from the same organic chaos as the roots of the tree.
Exactly. But that organic chaos requires immense manual labor. The construction process is fascinating, primarily because it completely bypasses the tools we normally associate with ceramics.
Right, because he works side by side with his wife, Cecilia.
Yes, his wife of over 60 years. It's a deeply collaborative physical process.
I read that Cecilia often takes charge of shaping the accent pots.
The Bois d'Olchalen.
Yeah, those ones. The smaller companion plants displayed alongside the main bonsai, while Dan focuses on the larger architecture and the glazes.
And together, they guarantee that no two pots are ever identical.
To maintain that guarantee, they completely reject the potter's wheel, don't they?
They do, and they reject slip casting as well. I mean, the wheel uses centrifugal force to pull clay up quickly. It naturally produces perfect, symmetrical circles.
And slip casting is pouring liquid clay into a plaster mold for mass production.
Exactly. Both methods yield uniformity. But Dan and Cecilia rely heavily on coiling.
Which is agonizingly slow.
Oh, incredibly slow.
You roll out long, heavy ropes of wet clay, and you stack them on top of a flat slab base, layer upon layer, manually building the walls upwards.
And it is a structural minefield. Without the centrifugal force of the wheel keeping the walls perfectly centered, you are fighting gravity with every single layer.
Because wet clay, the greenware, contains a massive amount of water.
Right. It's incredibly heavy and highly plastic. If you build the walls too quickly, the sheer weight of the upper coils will cause the lower coils to sag.
Or warp, or just collapse entirely.
Exactly. So you have to constantly step back, measure the profile, monitor the drying time of the lower sections so they can actually support the weight of the new additions.
And you have to meticulously blend the coils together, right? So no microscopic air pockets are trapped inside.
That is crucial. If an air bubble gets trapped between two coils, the air will expand rapidly in the intense heat of the kiln.
And the pot will literally explode.
Yeah, taking out everything else inside the kiln with it. It's devastating.
But what's interesting is that when he is blending those coils, dragging his thumb vertically across the stacked clay to seal the joints, he leaves distinct, deep drag marks.
He does. A commercial potter would immediately take a rib or a wet sponge and smooth those marks away.
Right, until the surface was indistinguishable from a machine-made product.
But Dan refuses to erase them. He deliberately leaves the tactile history of the construction visible on the surface.
He wants you to see the drag of the human hand.
Because he is validating the handmade nature of the object. But ensuring those human marks survive requires brutal physical exertion.
Especially on the really large commission pieces.
Oh, definitely. A large slab of wet greenware can weigh tens of kilograms.
I can't even imagine. Dan works with an assistant to roll out these massive bases and extrude the heavy coils.
But once you have built the walls of this heavy wet clay carcass, you encounter a major logistical hurdle. You have to attach the feet to the bottom.
Which means you have to flip the entire structure upside down.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah. You have a 50-pound, water-heavy, highly malleable clay box resting on a wooden board.
If you grab it by the rim to turn it over, the walls will just buckle and tear under their own weight.
The structural integrity is incredibly fragile at this stage.
So the tension in the studio during this phase is palpable. Dan has to position himself on one side of the wooden board, call Cecilia to the opposite side, and they have to synchronize perfectly.
They lift and flip the entire board and pot in one smooth, coordinated motion,
transferring the weight to a second board placed on top, so the pot is never unsupported.
It is a highly choreographed physical partnership just to expose the base.
And they go through all of this harrowing physical labor just to work on the feet.
Which is something I wanted to ask about. In everyday ceramics, the feet are an afterthought, right?
Just a basic ring of clay to lift the vessel so it doesn't wobble on a table.
Exactly. So why go to such lengths? Why risk destroying a massive bespoke pot just to spend hours designing the feet?
Because in bonsai aesthetics, the feet dictate the visual weight, the stance, and the breathability of the entire composition.
The breathability.
Yes, a bonsai pot must drain water rapidly to prevent the roots from rotting. And the air needs to circulate underneath to naturally air prune the roots as they grow out of the drainage holes.
Oh, I see. So the feet elevate the pot to facilitate that airflow.
Precisely. And visually, heavy, squat feet ground a massive, ancient tree, while delicate, elevated feet give a slender, elegant tree a sense of lightness.
So Dan uses the feet for intense architectural expression.
He really does. He has engineered several highly distinct styles.
Like his extruded, lozenge-shaped feet for elongated, elegant oval pots.
Yes, and he will roll out a thick slab of clay, use a custom-made metal cutter that looks exactly like a baking biscuit cutter to punch out perfect circles.
And then slice them in half to create immaculate, uniform, semicircular feet.
And then, of course, you have his famously named barley sugar twisted feet.
I love those. He takes a thick coil of clay and physically twists it until the surface tears slightly,
creating this gnarled, highly textured cylinder.
He actually compares them to looking like pork scratchings.
It's a very apt description. It creates a jarring, beautiful texture right at the shadow line where the pot meets the polished wood of the display table.
But the construction of the walls and the engineering of the feet are merely establishing the raw, three-dimensional canvas.
Right. Once the architecture is stable, Dan begins his true surface manipulations.
And this is where his photographic background heavily influences the clay, primarily through a signature technique he developed known as mud painting.
Now, the phrase mud painting sounds almost insulting to a master ceramicist, doesn't it?
It really does. It sounds like throwing wet earth at a wall to see what sticks.
But it is actually a hyper-calculated, painterly application of raised clay textures onto the smooth surface of the greenware.
He uses palette knives to apply thick, precise dabs of wet clay.
It is the exact ceramic equivalent of the impasto technique in oil painting.
Oh, like Van Gogh.
Exactly like a Van Gogh canvas, where the oil paint is layered so aggressively that it stands up off the canvas in three-dimensional ridges.
The paint stops being a color and becomes a sculptural element.
And Dan is doing this with raw mud. But crucially, he isn't just looking at the clay he is applying. He is calculating the negative space between the dabs.
Because he is designing for shadows.
Yes, because bonsai are often displayed under specific directional lighting in exhibitions.
So he calculates how those raised bumps of clay will cast microshadows across the surface of the pot,
creating an illusion of intense geological age and texture.
And he leverages this technique to give the bonsai owner incredible versatility, which is rare in traditional ceramic.
Absolutely. There is a famous bespoke piece he created, an elongated oval, often referred to as a velodrome or racetrack pot.
the two-faced pot. It is a brilliant piece of functional design.
It really is. Explain how it works.
Well, on one of the long, curving sides of the racetrack pot, he applied his aggressive, highly textured mud painting, so it looks rugged, wild, and heavy.
But on the opposite long side, he left the clay completely refined, smooth, and quiet.
So by engineering two distinct faces into a single object, he empowers the owner.
Exactly. Depending on the season, they can completely alter the visual narrative of the tree without ever repotting it.
Like displaying the smooth side during the delicate spring budding and turning it around to the rugged side during the harsh winter dormancy.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But while mud painting is additive, he employs a distinctly subtractive or even destructive process for a series of pieces known as his primitive pots.
And these are arguably his most controversial works,
They are, because they tap directly into the Japanese aesthetic philosophy of wabi-sabi.
which is the profound appreciation of transience, natural asymmetry, and imperfection.
Right. Dan is deeply inspired by ancient native pottery. Vessels baked in open pit fires millennia ago, using unrefined clays.
Those historical pots are rife with accidental slips, asymmetrical bulges, warping.
And uneven rims, because the ancient potters were battling the material just to make a functional vessel.
But to replicate that ancient, flawed aesthetic, Dan has to first engineer a structurally perfect pot.
Yes, he spends hours coiling, monitoring moisture, ensuring the walls are of uniform thickness to survive the kiln, and creating a pristine, perfectly level rim.
And then he deliberately destroys it.
He does.
He will grab a square piece of heavy timber and violently strike the wet walls. He will grab the perfect rim with his bare hands, twisting and gouging the clay to intentionally distort the symmetry.
It requires immense confidence.
But again, I have to ask the obvious question, isn't that just a bit cheeky?
Cheeky how?
Well, spending hours perfecting a pot only to hit it with a piece of wood and declare it an ancient masterpiece, it sounds like forced authenticity.
I see what you mean. It would be a gimmick if you were just wildly smashing it. But you cannot simply beat wet clay without consequence.
Because clay has memory.
Exactly. The microscopic platelets in the clay body align based on how they are manipulated. If you strike a wet wall, you introduce massive localized structural tension,
And if you just leave it, that tension will release in the kiln.
and the pot will warp disastrously or tear itself apart. So Dan's destruction is highly calculated engineering.
He has to counterbalance the trauma he inflicts on the clay.
Precisely. Every deep gouge from the timber, every aggressive twist of the rim must be counteracted. If he compromises the tension on the left flank, he has to understand exactly how that will affect the load-bearing capacity on the right flank.
So he operates on the principle that every line must relate to its opposite.
Yes, he is reverse engineering the accidents of history, which requires an absolute mastery of the material's physical limits. He is destroying the perfection to make the pot look like it evolved organically rather than being manufactured.
Okay, so the physical landscape of the clay is established. But the final, and undoubtedly the most volatile layer of Dan Barton's art is the application of glazes.
It really is. You can build the most structurally sound, perfectly textured pot in the world, but the moment you close the kiln door, you hand over control to chemistry and extreme heat.
It stops being sculpture and becomes outright alchemy.
Glazing is a science experiment conducted blind at 1,000 degrees.
And Dan's signature glazes are legendary within the European bonsai community.
Because he formulates them with a deep understanding of botanical aesthetics. His most famous development is arguably the Gunmetal Red.
Which isn't just a coat of paint, it is a highly complex, multi-fired matrix of metallic oxides.
And when it emerges from the cooling kiln, it doesn't look like glass. It yields these incredibly somber, heavy metallic hues.
It looks like oxidized iron or ancient rusted weaponry.
Yes, and there is a strict horticultural necessity for that specific aesthetic weight.
Because in bonsai, the species of the tree dictates the visual requirements of the frame.
Exactly. Consider an ancient conifer, a weather-beaten Scots pine, a juniper, or a larch.
These trees symbolize endurance. They represent survival against harsh alpine winds and freezing winters.
They feature dark, dense needles and deeply fissured, flaking bark.
So if you plant a rugged 400-year-old pine tree in a highly reflective, bright lime green ceramic bowl, the composition instantly becomes comical.
Oh, completely. The pot would just shatter the illusion of ancient endurance.
Right. Conifers demand visual gravity. They require subdued, earthy tones, raw umbers, dark grays, oxidized rusts, and gunmetals.
And the gunmetal red glaze provides a brooding, heavy anchor that supports the visual weight of the old tree without ever competing with its foliage for attention.
However, on the opposite end of the botanical spectrum, you have deciduous species, or flowering and fruiting trees.
Like a Japanese mountain maple that erupts into brilliant crimson foliage in the autumn.
Or a delicate crabapple tree covered in pale white blossoms.
Those trees possess a very different visual energy, and they can support, and indeed require, brighter, more active glazes.
A smooth, pale, celadon blue pot beautifully complements the fiery red leaves of an autumn maple through color theory contrast.
Exactly. For these lighter applications, Dan formulated completely different chemical profiles, such as his wonderfully named pig fat glaze.
The name is abrasive, but the visual result is stunning.
It is a deeply viscous, creamy blue-green glaze.
That, crucially, develops a fine, intricate network of microscopic cracks across its surface.
What ceramicists call a crackle glaze.
Right. Now, the crackle effect is actually born from a deliberate, calculated flaw in the chemistry, isn't it?
It is. It occurs due to a mismatch in the thermal expansion coefficients between the underlying clay body and the glass glaze melting over it.
Wait, so as the pot cools in the kiln, the glaze shrinks at a slightly faster rate than the clay beneath it.
Spot on. The tension causes the glass surface to shatter into millions of microscopic fissures while remaining attached to the pot.
But when a pot with a white dolomite crackle glaze comes out of the kiln, those microscopic fissures are practically invisible.
Yes, the pot simply appears pristine white.
And in traditional ceramics, potters will wait decades, allowing atmospheric dirt, tannins from the soil, and repeated watering to slowly seep into those cracks, naturally highlighting the network over generations.
Dan, however, refuses to wait a century for his pots to look mature.
He developed an ingenious technique to manipulate time.
The sumi ink trick.
Yes. He takes Japanese calligraphy ink, specifically sumi ink, which is an incredibly dense carbon-based pigment.
And he vigorously rubs it across the pristine, newly fired white pot.
The entire vessel turns stark black.
And then he rapidly washes the surface with water.
Right, and because the surface is glass, the ink washes away entirely. But the sumi pigment particles are so incredibly fine that they have already penetrated deep down into the microscopic fissures of the crackle.
So when he wipes the pot clean, the surface is white again, but the entire intricate network of shattered glass is permanently stained black.
It forces a century of patina into a 5-minute process.
And this is where we see his photographic background asserting itself in the ceramic studio.
Oh, so?
Well, he's not treating the glaze merely as a protective finish. He is treating it as a reactive surface, exactly like photographic paper in a darkroom.
Oh, wow. He applies a chemical agent, the sumi ink, to develop the hidden image of the cracks, forcing it to appear instantly.
Exactly. It is a brilliant synthesis of his two primary disciplines.
That willingness to cross-pollinate ideas and rebel against limitations leads us perfectly to the story of the Fai-yaki rebellion.
It is perhaps the clearest example of his creative stubbornness.
The story goes that Dan was watching the Japanese television channel NHK, and he viewed a documentary detailing the creation of traditional igiyaki pottery.
Right. And igiyaki pots are revered because they are fired in massive traditional wood-burning kilns known as anagama.
And the environment inside a wood-fired kiln is pure, violent chaos.
Oh, absolutely. The wood ash is swept up in the drafts, flies through the kiln chamber, lands on the raw pots, and melts at extreme temperatures to create these incredibly subtle, unpredictable, natural ash glazes.
But operating out of his studio in Bristol, Dan relied on a modern electric kiln.
Electric kilns are highly efficient, clean, predictable, and completely static. There are no drafts and no flying ash.
So he knew with absolute chemical certainty that an electric kiln could never replicate the smoky, nuanced subtlety of an igiyaki wood-fired pot.
A lesser artist would accept the technical limitation and focus on what an electric kiln does well, which is uniformity.
But Dan decided that if the equipment denied her subtlety, he would completely abandon subtlety.
He initiated an aesthetic rebellion against the impossible standards of wood-fired restraint.
He began violently applying clashing, hypersaturated colors. He threw splashes of wild, volatile oxides onto the clay,
Intentionally dripping highly reactive glazes over one another to see how they would fight in the heat.
He engineered a completely new, unstable, almost psychedelic style of bonsai pot simply for the sheer joy of defying expectations.
And he named this wild style Fai-yaki. which translates roughly to Feylandware or Fairylandware.
He leaned entirely into the chaotic potential of his own chemical mixing, turning the sterile predictability of the electric kiln into a canvas for violent color.
However, while the explosive glazes of Fai-yaki and the aggressive textures of the primitive pots are wildly creative, we must ground this discussion in the physical reality of horticulture.
Because a bonsai pot is not merely a decorative sculpture resting in a gallery.
No, it must serve a vital, unrelenting physical function for a living organism. It is the ultimate expression of functional art.
The pot must regulate soil temperature, shielding delicate capillary roots from lethal winter frosts.
It must drain water efficiently to prevent anaerobic bacteria from rotting the root system.
And fundamentally, it must physically anchor the tree against the elements. Dan is not just playing with clay. He is constantly solving complex structural engineering problems.
The clearest example of his engineering prowess is his approach to the semi-cascade bonsai style.
Right. The semi-cascade, or full cascade, is styled to mimic a tree clinging desperately to the face of a sheer alpine cliff, its trunk reaching downwards to escape the shade and find sunlight.
Visually, the drama is spectacular. Physically, the physics are an absolute nightmare.
Because the mechanics of a cascade completely subvert standard center of gravity equations.
Exactly. The massive trunk does not grow vertically. It sweeps drastically out over the rim of the pot and plunges downwards.
Which means the vast majority of the tree's physical weight, the dense wood, the heavy foliage pads, and the water held within the leaves, is suspended entirely outside the footprint of the pot.
It creates a massive, unbalanced lever.
If a strong gust of wind hits that hanging foliage, or if heavy, wet snow accumulates on the downward-reaching branches during winter, the leverage will easily overcome the weight of the pot.
And the entire composition will tip over, shattering the ceramic and potentially killing a 50-year-old tree.
So how does Dan fix that?
He anticipates this kinetic load during the initial coiling phase. When he constructs a pot specifically intended for a cascade tree, he fundamentally alters the architecture.
He deliberately extrudes much thicker, denser coils of clay.
He builds the walls significantly heavier than a standard pot of the same dimensions. He is literally engineering heavy physical ballast into the base to counteract the leverage of the hanging branches.
He gives the pot intense physical gravity to fight the tree's inherent desire to fall over.
Yes, and his structural solutions go beyond mere weight. He innovated a completely hidden tie-down system.
Before the greenware is fired, he uses his tools to pierce small, discrete holes through the inside faces of the pot's feet.
Which is a masterstroke of functional design.
How does it work in practice?
Well, when a bonsai owner places a heavy cascade on an outdoor display bench, they can thread strong copper wire through those internal holes in the feet, securely lashing the pot directly to the heavy wooden bench.
And because the holes are on the inside of the feet, the anchoring system is completely invisible to the viewer.
Exactly. You just see this precarious, heavy tree balanced magically on the edge of a small pot, completely unaware of the structural engineering holding it safely in place against the wind.
It demonstrates a profound empathy for the daily anxieties of the bonsai cultivator. He is designing solutions for extreme weather, not just gallery lighting.
And he often combines that pragmatic engineering with a wonderful sense of humor and narrative.
Consider his drum pots. These are deep, round pots designed to emulate the aesthetics of traditional Japanese taiko drums.
The defining feature is a series of small, raised clay studs running around the upper and lower rims, representing the heavy metal rivets that stretch the animal skin across a real drum.
Now, in formal Japanese ceramics, those studs are mathematically precise, evenly spaced in immaculate rows.
But Dan, constantly pushing back against rigid formality, will often create drum pots where the studs are applied with utter haphazardness.
Some studs are clustered tightly together, others drift slightly higher or lower on the rim. The pristine symmetry is deliberately broken.
And when purists invariably ask him, "Dan, why are the studs on this pot so messy?" he has developed this fantastic lore to deflect the criticism.
He tells a story about how his 5-year-old grandson wandered into the pottery studio, watched his grandfather meticulously applying studs, and confidently decided to have a go at placing them himself.
It is a brilliant narrative shield. He uses a charming story to disarm the critic, while secretly satisfying his own artistic compulsion to disrupt formal geometry.
But creating hundreds of uniform little clay studs, whether placed neatly or haphazardly, presents a deeply frustrating physical challenge.
Wet clay acts like industrial glue. It adheres instantly to almost any tool you press into it.
Which highlights Dan, the pragmatic blue-collar problem solver. To manufacture these studs efficiently without them deforming, he engineered a bespoke tool utilizing what we can call the WD-40 trick.
The ingenuity here is so incredibly simple. He took a short piece of standard half-inch copper plumbing pipe.
He filled the inside of the pipe with hard wax and then scraped a concave indent into the top of the wax.
He effectively created a tiny, perfect stud mold. But the physics remain. If you press that wax and copper mold into a ball of wet clay, the clay will adhere to it violently.
So to circumvent the adhesion, he keeps a standard household dish sponge on his workbench, heavily soaked in WD-40 lubricating oil.
Before pressing the copper tool into the clay, he quickly taps the tool against the oiled sponge.
The WD-40 alters the surface tension and acts as a powerful chemical resist.
The wet clay instantly releases from the mold, leaving a perfectly shaped stud every single time.
Copper plumbing pipe, wax, and WD-40. It is a wildly practical solution to a delicate artistic bottleneck.
And his meticulous attention to practical detail extends to the very final moments before a pot leaves his studio. The source material highlights his habit of applying felt pads.
Which seems like a mundane detail, but it speaks volumes. When a high-fired stoneware pot comes out of the kiln, the underside of the feet are unglazed.
They're essentially raw, abrasive rock.
And in high-end bonsai exhibitions, these pots are frequently displayed on antique, highly polished mahogany or rosewood tables.
If you drag a heavy stoneware pot half an inch across one of those tables to center it, you will carve deep, permanent gouges into the wood.
Dan anticipates this. Before any pot is shipped, he meticulously measures and glues small, durable felt pads onto the unglazed feet.
It is a minor addition, but it demonstrates a profound respect for the end user and the wider exhibition ecosystem. He engineers his art to protect the art it'll eventually interact with.
When you aggregate all of these facets, the kinetic understanding required for the semi-cascade ballast, the chemical mastery of the dolomite crackle glazes, the pragmatic engineering of the WD-40 tool, the visual calculation of shadows in the mud painting, and the deep botanical knowledge of root temperatures and drainage, you realize Dan Barton is not merely a potter.
He is a polymath operating at the absolute zenith of his chosen medium.
He is a botanist, a painter, a sculptor, and a structural engineer, simultaneously executing all four disciplines in a single lump of clay.
And he has been refining this multidisciplinary approach for over 5 decades.
Which brings us to the monumental scale of Dan Barton's legacy and his profound educational impact on the global bonsai community.
A 50-year tenure in any artistic field is remarkable, but bonsai is a medium that actively resists rapid consumption. It literally measures success in decades and human generations.
To remain relevant and innovative for half a century means he has outlasted passing aesthetic trends.
He has watched delicate saplings. He styled mature into ancient, towering masterpieces, and he has fundamentally altered the trajectory of the art form in the Western world.
His drive to educate and build community started very early. In 1975, the UK bonsai scene was incredibly fragmented.
Dan wanted to connect with other enthusiasts in Bristol, but there was no internet, no established network.
So he simply wrote a note by hand and pinned it to a trader's stall at the local Downs Flower Show, asking if anyone was interested in forming a society.
18 people saw that note and attended the first meeting.
From that single handwritten invitation, he founded the Bristol Bonsai Society, which expanded rapidly to hundreds of members and became a cornerstone institution in the country.
His drive to elevate the craft didn't stop there. He went on to found the Association of British Bonsai Artists, fiercely advocating for bonsai to be recognized not merely as gardening, but as a legitimate high art form.
His authority became unassailable. For over 25 consecutive years, he was invited to serve as a judge for bonsai at the highly prestigious Chelsea Flower Show.
The Royal Horticultural Society does not invite you to judge at Chelsea for a quarter of a century unless your visual and technical eye is considered utterly flawless.
Furthermore, he codified his knowledge in 1989 by authoring a seminal text, simply titled The Bonsai Book, which served as the definitive, accessible Bible for an entire generation of Western practitioners.
Yet the true hallmark of a master is not just past accolades, but the capacity for continuous adaptation. Look at his response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Historically, the bonsai community is highly tactile and in-person. Shows, exhibitions, and club meetings were the primary avenues for potters to sell their work and interact with clients.
When the pandemic forced global lockdowns, that entire ecosystem vanished overnight.
It was economically and creatively devastating for many artisans, but Dan executed a seamless pivot.
He shifted his studio focus entirely toward highly bespoke digital commissions.
Clients isolated in different countries would email him high-resolution photographs of their specific naked trees.
Dan took on the immense, complex challenge of designing the perfect physical frame for a three-dimensional living organism he had only ever analyzed on a flat, two-dimensional computer monitor.
That requires an incredible synthesis of a lifetime of observation.
He had to instantly calculate the visual weight of the foliage mass, deduce the species' root growth habits, anticipate the color of the autumn display, and translate all of those variables into a bespoke combination of clay architecture and chemical glaze.
It kept his creative faculties fiercely sharp when the physical world was entirely shut down.
And despite the books, the Chelsea judging, and the international commissions, his most profound joy remains rooted in his origins as a lecturer at Bristol Polytechnic.
He is fundamentally a teacher. Over his career, he has conducted more than 500 distinct teaching programs, workshops, and live demonstrations across the globe.
He operates on the absolute conviction that hoarding knowledge is a disservice to the art form.
He doesn't fiercely guard his glaze formulas or hide his coiling techniques behind closed studio doors.
He actively disseminates them, ensuring the next generation is equipped to surpass him. There's a specific quote of his from our sources that perfectly encapsulates his relentless energy. He states simply, "Life is so good, there is no time left to die."
Life is so good, there is no time left to die. It is a staggering statement of intent from a man in his 80s.
Who is still actively wrestling heavy clay, still experimenting with volatile chemistry, and still working side by side with Cecilia, his creative and life partner of over 60 years.
And it forces you to confront the sheer permanence of what they have built. Dan's pots are cataloged in archives like the European Bonsai Potter Collective.
They are fiercely coveted by collectors worldwide. Because they are forged in extreme heat, they're literally transmuted into stone and glass.
Barring physical destruction, they will outlive all of us.
They will undoubtedly outlive the current trees planted inside them. Decades from now, long after the original tree has perished or been moved, those pots will be passed down to new cultivators, housing entirely new organisms, continuing to frame nature for generations yet unborn.
It is a legacy carved immutably into the earth itself.
So to bring this deep dive to a close, let's briefly survey the immense landscape we have covered.
We have tracked the evolution of a young boy captivated by the markets of Hong Kong, to a highly technical graphic design and photography lecturer, to an undisputed pioneer of global bonsai ceramics.
We have seen how his trained photographic eye refused to accept the subservient blandness of mass-produced commercial pots.
We have explored how he fractured rigid Eastern traditions with expressive Western aesthetics, engineered structural ballast for cascade trees, manipulated shadows with mud painting,
Forced artificial aging with sumi ink, and rebelled against the limitations of electric kilns with the explosive colors of Fai-yaki.
His entire career is a testament to relentless curiosity and the refusal to respect artificial boundaries.
He looked at the hard lines separating the living tree from the fired mud, and he spent 50 years relentlessly dissolving it, until the two became indistinguishable.
And as we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to consider, a concept that builds on everything we've analyzed today.
Consider the fundamental paradox of this art form. A bonsai pot is forged in the extreme, violent heat of a kiln. In that inferno, its physical shape, its structural tension, and the volatile chemistry of its glaze are locked permanently into static glass and stone.
It will never change its form again.
Yet the bonsai tree planted inside it is a hyperactive living organism. It is relentlessly pushing its roots against the clay walls, its trunk is expanding, its bark is hardening, and its canopy changes color and density with the passing of every season.
We have spent an hour dissecting Dan Barton's philosophy of the perfect marriage between the tree and the pot.
But how does any marriage survive when one partner is rigidly, permanently frozen in time, and the other partner literally never stops changing?
Perhaps the true underlying genius of a Dan Barton pot isn't merely how beautifully it frames the tree on the exact afternoon it is planted.
Perhaps his real genius lies in how that static piece of clay is intuitively engineered to endure, adapt, and continually complement a living, shifting organism as it ages over the next 100 years.
A marriage where the rigidity of the frame somehow gives the picture the space it needs to breathe. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep looking for the profound engineering hiding in the everyday world around you.
And the next time you see a potted plant, take a moment to look past the leaves and examine the canvas holding it all together. Until next time.